Okay, welcome everyone. Thank you for taking the time to join the webinar today. I'm Mark Jeavons and I'm the Head of Sustainability for CRU. I'm joined here today by Charlie Durant and Sarah Macnaughton, our Senior Sustainability Research Managers. We've got Frank Eich, who is our Resident Policy Expert, and Lize Wan, who's an analyst on our sustainability team. So this is CRU's second webinar on COP27, and the first one we held before it happened, and this time we're looking over actually what happened. So in this webinar, we're going to talk about the progress made at the COP27 conference, what the key takeaways were, and what the likely market impact is. So in our first webinar, we talked about the factors that could make COP27 a success. And of course, these included things like working collaboratively to deliver more ambitious emissions reductions. That's absolutely key. But also we were looking for putting in place the credible implementation plans, as well as the preparations for COP28 and the first global stocktake, which will be undertaken next year. So, Charlie, can COP27 be judged a success?
Yeah, overall, I think progress is pretty limited, which is disappointing given what's at stake. And I think, therefore, it's quite hard to view COP27 as a success. I mean, it was a mixed bag. There was some progress on some issues. I think particularly the progress was more on addressing some of the impacts of climate change, but there was very little progress on helping to address its causes. And I think the most notable failure for me is on emissions, and there was little progress on detailing how nationally determined contributions or NDCs are going to be implemented, and little in the way of further pledges or strengthening of NDCs that exist already. So at the core of the process, I think that COP and the Paris Agreement is about emissions reduction or climate mitigation. And I think the 1.5 degree future looks as far away now as it did before the conference. And there was little mentioning of energy infrastructure or changing fuel types either. So overall, I think there were some wins at COP27, but I don't think that they were ambitious enough to really meet the scale of the challenge that we're currently seeing.
Yeah, there certainly were a few notable wins at COP27, but did they really go far enough to be viewed as an implementation COP?
So yeah, the Egyptian presidency used the slogan together for implementation to describe the process of COP27. So whether it turned out to be the implementation COP, I think probably not. As I said, I think that the wins were not ambitious enough to meet the scale of the challenge. There were some important things decided, and there were some, I suppose, admin that was done, but overall I don't think there was enough breakthrough moments.
Yes, so what were the key takeaways from COP27?
So for me, I think it was the first time that the COP cover decision mentioned food, rivers, nature-based solutions, and tipping points. And I think there's a growing recognition that preserving and regenerating nature has a role to play. I think there was a success with setting up the new fund for loss and damage, and now this issue has been doing the rounds for 30 years. There's a lot more detail to be worked out, but that's still an important breakthrough. I think the continued progress on the just energy transition partnerships is a highlight, and I think we're going to talk a bit more on that later. And I also think, given all the pressures that governments are under currently, the fact there wasn't any backsliding on what's been agreed before was also a positive. A big success, I think, is the increased collaboration, particularly between the US and China, and hopefully that can tee up for future success as well. And I think the continued engagement of the financial world is important. It's obvious we need a lot of money to address a lot of the issues from climate change. So having the financial world there is really important. I think the final area where you could look for highlights is it's helped set up issues for COP28, but overall the world isn't on track for the warming kind of targets laid out in the Paris Agreement. The world is looking increasingly likely to miss the 1.5 degrees target, and the 2-degree target is in danger. So overall, it's time that's against us. So against that backdrop, the highlights I don't think are significant enough.
Yeah, and I suppose COP27 has been really set against a very difficult geopolitical backdrop with energy crises, which has to some extent meant we've had to temper our expectations this year. However, as you said, the COP has delivered some interesting takeaways, as you say. I think one of those interesting ones was the creation of the loss and damage fund, which marks an important point of progress. So maybe I could ask Frank, can you give us some insight into how the loss and damage fund is expected to be delivered, and what are the main challenges around getting the fund up and running?
Yes, thank you, Mark. So progress on loss and damage, as was already mentioned, was one of the highlights, probably the most important highlight of COP27. Loss and damage is really about helping developing countries deal with the disastrous consequences of climate change happening today, like flooding, for example, what we've seen in Pakistan. And it is seen as the third pillar next to mitigation and adaptation. So developing countries have argued for years, for decades, Charlie said 30 years, to set up such a dedicated fund. Nothing has happened so far, but something has happened at COP27. So, but it actually didn't look like that for most of COP. It was put on the agenda, but nothing happened for a while. Some countries made some commitments towards contributing to loss and damage. Germany, as the current host of the G7 presidency, they announced some insurance scheme called the Global Shield, but none of that actually met this central demand to set up such a fund. And then on Wednesday, 2 days before the official end of COP, COP27 went beyond the official date, the Europeans said actually in principle they would be supporting the establishment of such a fund, and that really broke the ice, and that set the path to actually setting something in motion, and then other countries joined. So they came up with an agreement on loss and damage, and they agreed to set up a dedicated fund and to establish funding arrangements, complementary funding arrangements. So I think that was a big breakthrough, and the COP27 presidency called it a historic breakthrough, given the decades of arguing for that. So how that will look like in reality, we don't know yet. Who will pay into that fund, who will contribute to that isn't clear, who will benefit from it isn't clear, on what criteria isn't clear, and that is what COP the next year, or probably beyond that, will be all about. So at COP27 they established a transitional committee to look into exactly what I just said: who is going to pay into it, who is going to benefit from it. The EU said only the most vulnerable countries should benefit from it. So not developing countries in general, but only the most vulnerable. So that's a subgroup. So you can already see discussions and arguments over that issue in the future. But an even more controversial issue is who's going to actually pay into that fund. At the moment, it's meant to be the developed countries. That is a definition by the United Nations, and that was set in the scheme of climate change in the 1990s. So some countries that were developing countries back then are actually quite wealthy nowadays and quite developed. So what we can expect to see over the next year or further is big discussions about who's going to pay into that. And what the Europeans have in mind is that oil-rich countries in the Middle East that are classified officially as emerging countries, but they are very wealthy. They have the financial means they ought to contribute, and also China. So that will be interesting to see how that will be addressed over the next 18 or 12 months, but also beyond that, because I don't think it will be sorted out by next COP28.